folks, Lenny Lawson here, the Car Guru. Welcome back, Lenny. Yes, I have been gone. I've had to run a couple reruns, and I apologize for that for you local folks that listen to the radio show. You know, I've only got like 400 shows to choose from if I do have to be absent, so I would think that if I reach back into the archives that you wouldn't notice. But there are some of you out there that are extremely tuned in and observant, and I get chastised by them. Yep, ran another rerun, didn't you? You know, yes, occasionally I have to. But as far as the podcast listeners, it's always fresh. It's just not as frequent sometimes during this time of year, especially when I'm going on my brother trips. Like I just got back from the Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance sponsored by Haggerty, the insurance company. Haggerty, I don't know whether they insure regular everyday cars. Mostly it's just classic cars that they insure. They don't insure any of mine currently. I use a different company, but yeah, I went down there. My brother and his friends decided to go, well, they live in Oak Ridge, so they drive a different way. So I went down by myself, left at 6 a.m. and got down there to Amelia Island, Florida in 7 hours and 15 minutes. Did I break the speed limit? Yes. Not the entire time, because I did use Blue Cruise. That's the hands-free driving app that Ford has. I'm just going to call it an app because it will go away in about, I think I've got maybe 2 more months of Blue Cruise enjoyment, and then it turns off unless I pay Ford $49 a month. Now, do I like hands-free driving? Yes, I do, except when there is there's some construction around and there's an immediate change of direction. You know how sometimes they have those concrete barriers and they've got them set up where you have to do a kind of a quick little jog, a little quick maneuver. Blue Cruise doesn't like that at all. And it can actually get very squirrely. And I learned that the hard way. It scared me. It really did. But once I had that one incident, then I was fine. I realized that if I saw any type of construction sign, then I turned the Blue Cruise off. I still used Cruise, but I didn't use the hands-free. So I'd recommend you pay attention to that if you are subscribing to Ford's service, or if you're driving a Lexus or a Tesla or something that has hands-free. I'm sure Mercedes and several other companies have that, but it's just, well, I know General Motors does. But you just can't trust it. You cannot take your eye off the road, because if you do, you get chastised by the system. It does set off some alarms, and there's flashing red lights. And if that happens when it's dark outside, it's a little, you feel chastised. You really do. So if you take a big drink of coffee or tea, or like look over to the left or to the right for an extended period of time, or reach down on the floor because you dropped something, then you will be warned. Okay, so what happened? I got there and went straight to the Gooding auction. And they were selling millions and millions of dollars worth of cars. And I met my brother and his friends, my friends now, and we sat down in the buyer's department. We got special seats because I had paid $200 for my ticket so that I could bid on cars. I had to send them a letter from my banker saying, yes, if he wants to buy something, he can, and we'll back him up. So my intention was just to have a good seat. My intention was not necessarily to buy something, but I did see something in the catalog before I left that I was slightly interested in. And I'd seen this beautiful car. It was a Washington blue. That's a very dark blue, tan top, kind of a brownish kind of a brownish leather interior. It was a 4-door car with suicide doors, which that's a terrible term, but it opens basically from the front rather than from the back. And it was just gorgeous. It was a 1934 model Ford Deluxe Phaeton. What is a Phaeton? It's a 4-door convertible. Now, back then, if it was a 2-door convertible, it was called a Roadster. They don't use those terms anymore. Well, there are no 4-door Well, there might be. Maybe Rolls-Royce makes a Phaeton now, but nobody else does. Most of us would not know anything about that. But I saw that car. I'd seen it in the catalog. I said, the estimate was between $30,000 and $40,000. I just thought that was ridiculously cheap if it looked as good in person as it did in the catalog. And when I got there to the tent, that's the car that I sought out. I had to find that car, and there it was. And it was, no car is perfect. But this car was very, very well done. And to make matters worse for me, the guy who restored the car was probably not 10 feet from me. And we were just looking at the car, and he started answering questions. I was talking to my brother, asking him, I wonder if this, I wonder if that. And he said, matter of fact, yes. Matter of fact, yeah. And introduced himself, and he was the man that restored the car. And he lives in Powell, Tennessee, just north of Knoxville. An amazing coincidence. But all the cars that were being sold underneath that particular tent, when I say tent, it's big. I don't know how many square feet it was, but there were at least, I would say, 30 cars in there, and they were all owned by one man. And his name is Bill Alley from Vermont. And Bill Alley was a very successful businessman. In 1969, he had founded a company called Research Engineering Corporation. He was a javelin thrower at the University of Kansas and Syracuse University. He was the NCAA champion in 1959 and 60 for Kansas. And then he had a lot of other success at other track meets and so forth. But in 1960, he was a runner-up at the U.S. Olympic trials and made the Olympic team and competed in the 1960 Olympic Games. I think those were in Tokyo, weren't they? Doesn't say here. But they were selling his entire collection of cars, and most of them were brass cars, meaning that they were from the 1900s through 1910, somewhere in the neighborhood. Buicks, Durays, I know you probably never heard of those, but there were a lot of other interesting cars. But included in this was this 1934 Ford Deluxe Phaeton. And it was extremely well done, and I said, I'm in trouble. So I got to my seat, and they started running these cars. This was the 17th vehicle to run across. And when it got up there on the stage, I said, I'm not going to let this thing go cheap. I'm going to buy it if it's anywhere below this. I was talking to my brother. And like I said, the low estimate was $30,000. The high estimate was $40,000. And I had that thing bought at $28,000. And they went, going once, going twice. And before he could slam that little hammer down, another man jumped in. And I could see him. He was standing up, and he was raising his hand. And he hit it, and I hit it, and then he hit it, then I hit it. Finally, he stopped. I ended up paying $34,000. I saw him not too long after that, and I walked up to him, and I said, you cost me $6,000. He said, I beg your pardon? He had a really good conversation. But he actually worked he was a subcontractor for the Gooding Auction Company. He actually works on Bugattis. He said, Lenny, right now I have $50 million worth of Bugattis in my garage. I said, that must be some garage. How many cars is that? He said it's about 10 cars. So he is a Bugatti expert, but he loves Model A's and these 34 Phaetons. He loves four-door Phaetons. And so he said, I wasn't going to let it go too cheap. And I said, I said that same thing. So anyway, I ended up with the car, and he offered all kinds of assistance. He had actually worked on the car before the auction just to make sure that it was ready to roll across on its own power. So I appreciated that. So I paid them for the car and made arrangements to have the thing shipped to Greenville, Tennessee, with a company that was down there called Intercity Transport. And I made those arrangements on Saturday, and that car arrived in Greenville, Tennessee from Florida by 9 a.m. on Monday. And I was tickled to death. Somebody came out and said, Lindy, there's a guy out here driving a truck, says he has a car to unload for you. And I said, are you kidding me? And so I went out there, and there he was. So anyway, I've got a lot to talk about today. I better get with it right after this break. I got some interesting emails while I was gone. I filtered through 5 or 6 of them, and they had some good questions. One person was asking me, Lenny, you talk about finance products, things that are sold to consumers after they buy a car, or, During the car buying process, it's after they've agreed to the purchase. Could be the difference, the trading difference, the sale price. It could be they've agreed to a payment, which is a horrible way to buy a car. But she asked me, what is GAP? Please explain what GAP insurance is. I said, okay. Guaranteed Asset Protection. That's what GAP stands for. And what it does, it's an insurance product that you can buy. Well, there are some banks that sell it, credit unions, other insurance companies sell GAP, but it is an insurance product that you should only consider if you are really upside down, if you have a lot of negative equity in your car, or you pay very little money down when you buy the car, because cars depreciate rapidly. Many vehicles do, especially if it's a Kia or a Hyundai or a Mercedes or a BMW. There's a lot of them that depreciate rapidly. Maybe some of the things I sell depreciate rapidly. That's just what happens. It didn't happen during the pandemic. Everything went up, but it's happening again now. So let's say that you buy a car, you agree to the terms, and you know that you're carrying over probably $5,000 to $10,000 in negative equity from your previous loan. In other words, you owed $5,000 or $10,000 more on your vehicle than what they're paying you for it. Then that puts you in the hole. And if you were to buy the new car, drive it for 6 months to a year, have a major accident, totals the car, or it gets stolen, then your insurance company is only going to pay you what the vehicle is worth at the time it is stolen. You know, they're going to look at mileage, and they're going to look at other vehicles like that. What are they worth on the used car market right now? So you may owe a whole lot more on your vehicle than what they're willing to pay you. That's what GAP insurance does. It steps in and pays that deficiency. So if they say, we're only going to pay you $30,000 and you owe $50,000 on it, then GAP will step in and pay the $20,000. Is that a good thing? I think it's a good thing. I think too many people buy GAP that don't need it. But if you are in a position, well, I guess first you have to say, well, what are the odds that I'm going to total the car or that it's going to be stolen? Those odds are pretty slim to begin with. But if it did happen, how much is GAP? Well, GAP is anywhere from $600 to $1,000. Why is there a range, Lenny? It's because dealers can charge what they want to for GAP. And you just need to make sure that you're not paying more than, $600, $800 for a GAP policy. And of course, they'll tell you, well, it's only costing you an extra $15 a month. And when you look at it that way, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to you. And I get it. The same thing if you're buying a service contract or prepaid maintenance. You lump all that together, you divide it by your term, and it doesn't sound like much. But when you multiply it by 84 months that you're going to be paying for that thing, just keep in mind, anything that you add to that contract, you're paying interest on it as well. Now, if you're financing the car at 0% or 1.9, it doesn't hurt that much. But if you're financing it at, 8% or 15% if you have bad credit, or 20%, then you have to really think about it. Another reason to buy GAP may be because you're just not paying anything down. You're financing the whole thing. What you can do is just look, when you're getting ready to buy a car, then just go to kbb.com and see what that same car is worth 2 years from now with 24,000 miles on it, or however many miles you put on a vehicle. How much did it depreciate? You can see the future that way, and it's not a bad thing to do because you might want to trade in 3 years. What's a vehicle just like the one you're looking at, thinking about buying, equipped the same, going to be worth in 3 years if you like to trade every 3 years? And then the second thing you need to calculate is how much will you owe on that car in 3 years. So you can go to bankrate.com, or there's a lot of different places or apps and stuff where you can figure out an amortization schedule. I have to say that slowly. Amortization. Hey, I did it right. So that schedule will tell you what your principal balance will be at the end of 3 years if you make all your payments on time and don't have any late charges. Compare that number to what your estimated value is in 3 years, and you can see, if it's within $5,000, you're probably okay. But gosh, If there's a $10,000 or $15,000 difference, you might want to buy gap insurance, or you might want to pay some money down so you're not financing as much. You know, cars and trucks and SUVs, with a few exceptions, are lousy investments. They're just an expense. That's all they are. Yeah, I mean, they're an essential expense, just like a horse was to the cowboys. You know, you had to have a horse. Well, you pretty much have to have a car. And what's the best way to get it? That's why people lease. I think that's one reason that people do, because they figure, well, you know, I know what it's going to cost me. I don't have to worry about depreciation. I'm paying for depreciation. But that's basically what I'm doing if I buy a car as well. But at the end of 3 years, if it's depreciated more than what they said it was going to, it's not my problem. I just hand them the keys and walk away and jump into another vehicle. You know, when I go out and look at cars, if I'm you, I'm always going to get a lease quote. I don't care if you're dead set against it. Get a quote. Just see what it is. Just don't let them jack around with the cap cost. That's the same thing as the selling price. Don't let them go from, you know, $55,000 sale price to a $60,000 cap cost. Those numbers should be the same. That's what the lease is based on, or one of the things that the lease is based on. It's called the capitalized cost, cap cost. I guess some salespeople may refer to it as the selling price, but that's not what it is. Wrong definition. Now, gap insurance, so you don't need it on a lease because it's built in. I mean, you need it, but it's free. It's built in. You know, if the vehicle is totaled, it's not your problem. That's part of what many dealers call the acquisition fee. And it protects you, and it protects the company that owns the vehicle. Because when you lease, you are literally paying for the right to use a vehicle that belongs to somebody else, and all of the risk is on them. You know, I guess you do have some risk if you go over on miles. You'll have to pay extra for miles. It's not, you know, you need to go into a lease based on what your current driving habits are. I mean, if you drive 20,000 miles a year, don't do a 10,000 mile a year lease, because you're going to be sorely disappointed when you get that bill in the mail for the extra mileage. Just build in the extra mileage up front and see what that cost is. I think it's a great thing to do, personally. You know, can you still get taken advantage of on a lease? Yeah, you can. You just have to go to the place where you don't have to worry about that. Hopefully it's somebody that you trust and you've done business with in the past, and they wouldn't mislead you for anything. I think that's important. So that's a long answer to what is gap, isn't it? One other thing I wanted to just remind you of, and I'll get to that right after the break. Okay, another reminder. Well, this is something you may not realize, because the dealership really thinks that you're already sold by the time you get into the finance office. They're just going to present to you some of the finance products like gap insurance, a service contract, prepaid maintenance, maybe some other types of protections against damage to your wheels, key replacement, which is, you know, keys are real expensive. So there'll be other products that they're trying to sell. But another thing that they can do is they can do multiple scenarios for you. Let's say that you were out there with a salesperson and you didn't really care about the monthly payments. You didn't want to talk about that until you got into the finance office. And they'll resist that. Some people will. We won't, of course, but some dealers will. They want to close you out there on the floor. But you just tell them, no, not until I see some different financing and leasing scenarios. And if you use that term, they'll be, where did you learn that? And then you'll just tell them on My Car Guru. He told me to go in and look at multiple scenarios, like different terms on a purchase, different interest rate options. I mean, what if you can finance through the manufacturer at 0, or you can finance through the credit union and the rate is 6%, but by financing through the credit union, you get a $2,500 rebate. Can you figure that out in your head? Probably not. If you have some type of expensive calculator, you might be able to. But that's a scenario. Those are two different scenarios. How are you going to decide which one's better for you? Well, you've got to see what the payments are going to end up being and how much you're going to owe. And then still, you have to take into account, are you going to trade in 3 years? Or are you going to trade in 6 years? Or are you just going to pay the thing off and keep it forever? So that's one scenario. Another scenario would be a lease. And you just tell them, I want to compare the purchase price at 60 months to a lease at 36, because I typically trade every 36. I do not want to go 72 months. I do not want to go 84 months because I want to pay the vehicle down quicker, and I don't want to have negative equity. And so there's a lot of different things that they can do, but it's called multiple scenarios. The finance guy has a button on his computer that will do that. He can bounce back and forth between scenarios if he's been doing it for a while. If he's a greenhorn, he may not be able to do that. If he has to exit the office, as soon as you bring that up, he's lost. He's going to get his sales manager. Hey, you need to come talk to this guy. He said something about scenarios. So then the sales manager shows up and said, what's going on, folks? I thought we had a deal. Push, push, push. You're at the wrong dealership. You need to sit with people who are willing to help you buy the car in a way, in a manner that fits your lifestyle, that fits your car life, and you'll be a whole lot happier. So just keep that in mind. If you need help with scenarios, you can always call me first, and I'll just sit down at my computer and I'll work with the manager and we'll go through different scenarios with you. It's not that hard. It's not like launching rockets into space or landing them after we do. It's not that hard. Well, thanks for listening to this edition of My Car Guru. Again, if you have any questions, text them to me, 423-552-2020, or send me an email to LennyLawson2020@gmail.com, and I'll see you next time.